This basket of goods, as you see, had a pretty stable price level for 150 years, 1800 to about, well, you probably a lot of you know where that graph ends, around 1933. Those blips are wars. And during war, yes, our nation went into printing paper money to finance the war. You saw a spike in inflation. The paper money system was replaced, and we went back more or less to the commodity backing of gold and silver, and they were able to pay the debt down, and prices came down, and everything was happy again, all right? So for 150 years. And I'll tell you a little story. The Seventh Amendment of the Constitution talks about suits. Lawsuits. And I'm going to paraphrase here because I don't have it in front of me. Talks about lawsuits. And any suit that is above $20 is going to be tried by jury. Okay? Think about that today. Any lawsuit over $20, you have a jury trial. And that is one of the reasons that the folks on the liberal persuasion and the progressive socialist persuasion says the Constitution is a living, breathing document that needs to be replaced. Because see, that mechanism is just ridiculous. It's not in effect today. See, the Founding Fathers could have never foreseen the modern technology that we'd have today and the prices and all those kind of things. So the whole document, throw it out because it's ridiculous. Well, look what happened though. 150 years it was valid. 150 years. Well, what happened? Woo! 1933 happened. Roosevelt calls in the gold after the Great Depression, makes private ownership of it, at least a certain portion of it above a small level, illegal, devalues it, and really it was that mechanism that turned around the Great Depression. People say it was World War II. No, they called in the gold and they did a massive devaluation of the dollar against gold, and that finally stopped the deflation and began something that is a whole lot worse. And that's this thing called inflation. And this same basket of goods and services since then has just continued to go up in price because they continue to create money and print money. And there were certain mechanisms that kept that in a limited check and balance for a while until right here, 1971, where Nixon took us off of the gold standard internationally. Our gold was back, or our dollar was backed by gold internationally until 71. He closed the window on that because people were saying, you're printing too much money. We're going to redeem it at 35 bucks an ounce while we still can. And gold was flying out of the United States, and Nixon said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. Basically defaulted. You know, when Ron Paul says we've defaulted before, we've defaulted on our obligations before in this country. So the fact that they're threatening to maybe do it again shouldn't surprise anybody. We have a history of this. But then in 71, that cut it, and we became 100% fiat, which means all these paper currencies out there just float against each other based on confidence. That's it. You know what's backing your money? Two things, confidence and debt. Yeah, cool. Think about that though, folks. This is the situation we're in now. When money is backed by confidence, then confidence can be lost. And when it is lost, it gets lost en masse very quickly, and that's when the trouble begins. The fact that our money right now is backed by this confidence, and then it's actually literally backed by debt instruments, which means, now catch this, it took me a long time to wrap my brain around this one, and you may have already wrapped it around. Wonderful. New money in this nation is created only when new debt is issued. Okay? Not a dime is created. Not a dime of new money comes into existence to finance any enterprise, public, private, government, or otherwise, unless new debt is issued. So from, once again, a biblical perspective or a moral perspective, guess what? In order for our economy to grow, somebody has to become a slave to debt. And that's the mechanism we've had in place for quite a while. Anybody see a problem with that? Yeah. Ought to make us a little upset, huh? So this is the situation we're dealing with right now. This is the reality of the situation we're dealing with. This is where we've been. This is what happens. I mean, when man's money, I call it man's money because it's created by man. He's got his hooks and fingers into it. He's the one who says, I've got control. I've got a better way. I've got a better way than Scripture and the Constitution says, so guess what? We're going to try this and see where it leads us. When it dies, and every single fiat monetary system in the history of the world has either died or been replaced voluntarily because they saw its end coming, every one of them. If we think for one moment that we're going to be different now, we are sadly mistaken. Only this time it's on a global basis. Before it was a regional currency. It may have been a single nation's currency. They got off on this crazy idea of paper money. It blew up, and then they ran to some other nation's currency that was backed by what? Gold and silver. Oh, we're sorry. Can we use your money for a while to restart our economy? Sure. Well, we don't have that now. Okay? We don't have it. Nowhere. Nowhere. You got to let that one sink in, because when this system gets reset, and we'll talk about that later, it's going to cause some very significant issues. Where do we go? What do we do? What are they going to plan to do? We'll talk about some of those things a little bit later. Fiat money is a tradition of man. I call it a tradition of man again because man has made it. It allows man to be sold into slavery. And as I said before, when it's backed by debt, that's what happens. When our government issued all these trillions of dollars of bonds and the Federal Reserve buys them, monetizing the debt, what are they doing? They keep saying this thing out there like the Fed is the lender of last resort or the purchaser of last resort. Baloney. They're not. You know who is? You and me, the taxpayer. Because we either pay it out of our pocket through taxes, or 17 generations from now have to pay it because it's so blown up, or we pay it when the purchasing power of our savings is destroyed through inflation and hyperinflation. That is reality of this system. You and I are the lenders and payers of last resort. This is the kind of thing we've got to get in front of our legislators and say, no more, okay? We don't want any more of this. And that's going to be an important thing for all of us to understand and recognize when we get to the other side of this system that we have now. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I told you, I'm in a mood tonight. Government spend money without approval of its citizens. Good grief. How many of these agencies are being funded by printed money? TSA. How many of you like TSA? FDA, NEA, EPA, AAA, they're out there. All these agencies, guess what? They are funded by printing of money. They are. They could not be as big or as powerful as they are today without this system, where right now they're borrowing 40 cents, 41 cents on every dollar that we spend. So by logical extension, if you took and said, we're not going to go into debt anymore, then all of those agencies would shrink overnight by 40%. Bingo, like that. That'd be kind of nice, wouldn't it? They'd have to make some cuts. They'd have to make some choices. Well, that one's going to go, that's going to go, that's going to go. We're going to keep that one going. But because they print all this money up, they don't have to make those choices. It's evil, because how many of you folks want your tax money paying for any of those? So what is it? It's extortion. And it's forced payment for things that none of us want to pay for. Now, does that sound like freedom to you and me? Does that sound like liberty? No, it does not. And these are the kind of things that people are waking up to around this country. And they're saying, I don't think I like that. What can we do about it? So we'll talk about a little bit later what we can do about that. Fiat money allows theft of savings through debasement. We talked about that. You clip that money off. In the olden days, that's what they used to do. They'd clip it off and put more coins out in the Roman Empire, and they'd meld them down. And it's kind of interesting. Just as a little story in the Roman Empire, they started out using silver and gold as money, and silver was the monetary unit of the day, pure silver. And by the end of their collapse of their empire, their money had such a thin coating of silver on it. They're still trying to fool the people. The people knew. I mean, good grief. But it had such a thin coating of silver on it, it would literally be in circulation for days or maybe a couple of weeks, and you'd start to wear through and see the base metals underneath. No different than what's going on out there right now. Absolutely no different. And and we don't have time tonight, in the long version of the seminar, we talk about this, but if you map out the decline of the Roman Empire, it absolutely followed the debasement of their money. Because as they debased their money, two things happened. They overreached their mandate, quote unquote, in terms of military and their expansion and their empire building. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. And they also funded all these programs that just destroyed the morality of the empire. Destroyed it. And they funded it. And it was on purpose because they knew is that we got to distract people because we see they're not totally dumb, but we can distract them. And we can distract them by putting up the Coliseum and giving them all these entertainment and getting all this lifestyle of decadence in and really distract them while we're still out there kind of doing it. And in the end, it just fell in a heap. It sounds familiar for a reason, and that's because, what's the old saying? History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And I'll once again tie this back into Scripture. You can see again and again cycles throughout history, up and down, up and down, up and down. I mean, it's very consistent. We can learn from history. We can. We refuse to as a people. I don't know why that is, but we can. And for those who have eyes to see, we can foresee what's coming. We can foresee the danger and foresee the evil and take steps to hide themselves. That's Proverbs 22:3. Those things are there and available for us. So that's why we're here tonight, to help prepare you and to help let you know, hey, the whole thing's kind of gotten a little crazy, gotten a little off tracks again, but you can foresee it and take steps to prepare your family. These are the kind of things that our debt-based monetary system do. I think we've talked about this as well. I don't want to belabor these points. Bondage to the banking system because of debt. Traditional family roles are undermined, and that's something that's not very popular to talk about these days, but guess what? It's part of reality, and I like talking about reality and not what is politically correct. If you look at really what's happened over the last 100 years to the family unit in this nation, it has been systematically destroyed as our money has been debased. Because it used to be that Dad used to be able to support the family. He could go out and make a decent wage. And you know what? People often tell me, well, Doug, are you one of those guys that say Mom has to stay home? No, I'm not. But guess what? It should be her choice. Okay? It should be her choice. She shouldn't have to go into the workforce in order to make ends meet. When that happens because of monetary debasement, guess what? Mom's been literally stolen from the family and thrust out into the workforce. And their children then are given over to an educational system that I will say is hostile to traditional American values and the Judeo-Christian value. It's hostile from kindergarten to PhD. Okay? That is reality. I'm sorry. So those are the casualties. Those are the casualties. Our families are casualties. Our children are casualties. Our society then, by extension, becomes a casualty. It's evil, this thing is. And I'll call it what it is. The monetary system that we have is evil. Okay? It's another word that isn't very politically correct. You'll figure out by the end of the night, I'm not politically correct. The illusion of increased standard of living grows with the accumulation of material possessions purchased with debt. Credit cards, 6 months financing, yada, 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 go on and on and on. The materialism that this nation has fallen into, and it's all steeped in debt. We're making payments on everything. We're making payments on our TV hanging on our wall. So it's an illusion. This is not prosperity. It's an illusion purchased through debt. Meanwhile, the real standard of living in terms of relationship with one another, that time we used to spend off the treadmill of trying to make ends meet and relating to one another and our relationship with God, it's destroyed. So families are literally bound by debt and sacrificed on the altar of mammon. Okay? It's not what God intended, but guess what? It's a just consequence for what we've got. Okay? That's just part and parcel. You reap what you sow. That's what we're seeing here, folks. When the system dies, savings are wiped out overnight. And it can happen literally overnight. But these are some of the things that happen. I mean, you look in history when these systems have blown up and they've gone up into this hyperinflation. And as Matt's talking about, when the things really happen, when life goes crazy out there, which we're trying to protect ourselves and prepare ourselves for, this is what they're suffering. This is the human suffering. And I want you, this is something that's important for us as people to care about our fellow humans. They go through this. This is what happens within the confines of this evil system. And we're experiencing it here in the United States right now. It's just beginning. Okay? So I take this graph and I put a little different heading to it. It isn't the price level of the United States, it's the level of suffering of families in the United States. I think you can map them out. You can map them out. You may not agree with that, but I'd challenge you to at least look at it. Okay? The love of money is the root of all evil. This is a lot of evil. All right.